Hello, everybody, and happy Thursday. It is wonderful to welcome you to our program today with Hillary Levey Friedman, author of Here She Is, and here is her book. So Professor Levey Friedman is a sociologist and expert on after-school activities, beauty pageants, childhood socialization, and popular culture, who teaches courses in the Department of Education at Brown University. She holds degrees from Harvard University, Princeton University, and the University of Cambridge. Her book, Here She Is, The Complicated Reign of the Beauty Pageant in America, was released by Beacon Press last August. And she is also the president of the Rhode Island chapter of the National Organization for Women. And she is a volunteer court-appointed special advocate. So an impressive woman just by her bio, but even more impressive, I'm sure, when we have a chance to learn from you, Professor. So no one really wants to hear from me. We do want to hear from you. So I'm going to turn things over to you at this time. Welcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here today. I'm going to share my screen. So very excited to be with you all today. It probably helps. It's a little rainy, I think, wherever we both are. I'm in Providence, Rhode Island right now, so not too far from you all. But in any case, I am here today to talk about my most recent book. Here She Is, The Complicated Reign of the Beauty Pageant in America, which came out in the pandemic. So I have never had an in-person book event for this book. And so it's good to always get to talk about it and see people virtually. Now, when most people, especially Jewish women of a certain age, find out that I'm doing this book, and I say, I myself have never competed in a beauty pageant, but my mother is a former Miss America, they're like, well, hold on a second, is your mom Bess Meyerson? So that's, as you probably know, she is the first and only Jewish woman to ever be crowned Miss America. But Bess Meyerson is not my mom. My mom was Miss America in 1970. She was Miss Michigan, grew up in the suburbs of Detroit, and I grew up in Michigan in a town some of you may have heard of called West Bloomfield, Michigan. And I say that she's a devout Catholic with a thing for Jewish men. So that's the explanation of how I came to this topic. And when I was growing up, I often said that my mom was the beauty and I was the brains. And part of my journey and part of the journey of this book is thinking about the ways in which beauty and brains are not mutually exclusive, or they don't have to be. So my mom was Miss America in 1970. And when I first came to Brown University in the fall of 2015, I was exploring starting a book on this topic. And one of my very first students was someone named Cara Mund, who was in that class. And I ended up advising her senior thesis. And she told me in that process, she grew up in North Dakota. She said, I'm going to go home and I'm going to compete after I graduate to try to become Miss North Dakota. And I said, would it be really weird if I went to watch you compete and see what that was like? And she was like, no, you should come. I was like, okay. I mean, how often do you get to go to North Dakota, honestly? So I went and drove across the state of North Dakota to see that at the same time. And she did a really great job, and she was first runner-up that year. And the next year she went back, the last year she could compete. She was crowned Miss North Dakota. I watched online, and as soon as she was crowned, I said, well, I'm going to Atlantic City this fall. And so I was there when she became Miss America, which was one of the top 5 coolest things I've ever experienced. So my mom was Miss America. One of my students, who I'm still very close to, became Miss America. And as you heard, I am also president of the Rhode Island chapter of the National Organization for Women. So I've long been involved in the feminist movement and in the organized feminist movement. And of course, that movement has an interesting history with beauty pageants, and now in particular. And so I felt like I have this perspective that nobody else has, and I'm sort of inside and outside of this world. And what Here She Is does is really tell the story of how beauty pageants and the feminist movement have been linked together from the very start in the 1840s all the way up to the present. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of the book as a whole. And then I have some discussion questions. So I'm told you're a very talkative group, so I may not even have to go to them, but happy to share those if we need to. So I want to give you an overview so you get a sense. If you haven't read the book, and maybe this will hopefully make you interested in doing so. So the way the book is organized is around what I call the 3 waves of feminism, and starts with the suffrage movement, moves on to second wave feminism, and then up to the present moment. So as I mentioned, I start this with beauty and brains. And so I'm not just being self-deprecating when I say that I literally look nothing like my mom. So here's a photo of my mom, and this is me when I was around 9 years old. And the book starts with this preface, probably the best advice my mom has ever given me when I was 9. Right around this age, I went to a child beauty pageant with her that she was judging because I grew up. My mom was a single mom raising me, and so I tagged along to everything, and I'm an only child. And she went to judge this to make some extra money on the weekend, and I was in the audience. And at the end, I said to her, I really think I could do this. And setting aside any of the issues about the need for orthodontia and the glasses and all of those things, she said, Hillary, you could compete and deserve to win and not win because you're my daughter, or you could compete and win and everyone could say you only won because you're my daughter, even if you deserved it. And she said, you need to go and you need to find your own thing. And so that was really good advice. And I was a bookworm by nature and still am. And so that was the path I went on. And it, again, as I said, it took many decades for me to figure out how to bring those things together. So that's how the book begins. And it starts, then it goes back in history to really the start of the women's movement and the fight for suffrage. And this is a graphic that the New York Times did because last August, right around when the book came out and the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment. And I love this graphic that they put together, which links these sashes, the votes for women. And this particular one that's pictured comes from the British suffragette movement. The suffragist movement here in the US has yellow as one of its key colors and not green. But the ways in which these sashes are connected. And when people say, what do you mean pageants and the feminist movement are deeply connected? I say, well, why do you think pageant contestants wear sashes? And so largely what I'm trying to do, and here she is explain how we get from here, which is a 1913 march in Washington, D.C., fighting for women's suffrage. You can see the women are very organized. They're wearing their dresses, they're wearing their sashes and their hats. And less than a year after the 19th Amendment was ratified, giving most women the right to vote, not all women, but many women, we get the very first Miss America pageant. So this is September 1921. The 8 women who, honestly, at that time, it was quite out there to put your body in public and be judged and appear in a bathing suit. Now these women are much, much, much more covered up than most people think today. You would be in a swimsuit. The winner is the one who is second from the left, who's revealing her knees, shocking though that may be. Her name was Margaret Gorman, and she was Miss DC. So you can see that they're wearing the sashes that indicate the state or the city that they're represented. Now, flash forward almost exactly 100 years, and this is what contestants in the Miss America pageant look like. And if you look, sorry, your faces are blocking it, but you can see my student Cara Munn there second from the end in the black, wearing her Miss North Dakota sash. So clearly these women look quite different 100 years later. They're wearing bikinis, bearing their midriffs, wearing 6-inch heels, which, let's be honest, none of us wear 6-inch heels. If you walk on the boardwalk in 6-inch heels, that is not a good thing and not practical at all. But this is the journey that women in the United States went on in many ways, that we were able to be in public physically and show our bodies. And by the same token, this was actually January 2020, right before the shutdown. This is a group of women in Virginia, which became the 38th state to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. So the same women that you see in the top picture, shortly after the 19th Amendment was ratified, got organized to try to pass the Equal Rights Amendment, which is something we are still fighting for today. But Virginia became the 38th state. Some of the women are wearing sashes still, but you can see a woman in the background wearing what's known as the pink pussy hat. So you can also see the ways in which fashion and expression for women continues to be part of the story of feminism. So here she is, tries to tell the story of how all of these things are connected, and there are a few detours along the way. So this is a picture of the protest outside of the 1968, well, it was the 1969 Miss America pageant, but it was in September 1968, because pageant math can be a little bit fuzzy. But this is September 1968, seen as one of the foundational public events of second wave feminism. Group of women from New York City get organized to go protest outside of the Miss America pageant. And this event became the source of the erroneous and pejorative term of bra burners, because they did not actually burn their bras, but here they are throwing their bras into the freedom trash can. And the reason these women chose to do this outside of the Miss America pageant is that Miss America pageant was one of top 10 shows as soon as it began airing in the 1950s through up until the 1980s. It was an event that, people, much like the Super Bowl, would, sit and watch on a Saturday or a Sunday night. And so this was the platform they needed to get the message out there that, there were many other ways to be a woman, not just in terms of how you look, but what you do as well, which is very much a message that some, but not all pageants have incorporated since that time. So that's a lot of what chapter 3 is about, this burning versus padding bras. And then I move on to what many people think of as identity politics, but also the rise of intersectionality, starting in the 1980s when Vanessa Williams is crowned Miss America. And Vanessa Williams, first Black Miss America, and also the first and only Miss America to ever have her title taken away and to step down and give up her crown. So Vanessa Williams' story is very complicated in many ways, not just by her race, but also around issues of sexuality. So if you recall or anything about the situation, she was stripped of her crown and title because of photos that came out that she took before she was Miss America, that were nude photos published in Penthouse. And it wasn't just that she was nude, it wasn't just that she was in sexual positions, but she was doing so with another woman. So a lot of interesting, complicated things going on there. Of course, Vanessa Williams has gone on to have like a truly phenomenal career. Many of you might know her from most of my students know her from Ugly Betty these days, but she's in this new Peacock show, Girls Five Ever, which is very funny if you watch it, Tina Fey show, and many other, she's been Tony nominated, Emmy nominated, all of these things, but becoming Miss America and the platform being the first Black winner, and then some of the infamy helped launch her in her career, I'm sure, in all sorts of both positive and negative ways. Of course, in the 1990s, the pageant world was dominated by the story of the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. This is a photo of her. And that story coincided with the rise of not just tabloid TV, but also reality TV. And so shortly after the JonBenet Ramsey murder, still never solved. I'm happy to talk about that more, but we get shows like Toddlers and Tiaras on TLC. So many people just didn't know about this world before the Ramsey murder. And, became clear this could be fascinating and fascinating in many ways for people. So Toddlers and Tiaras and many other shows came in. And also we see the rise of reality TV just across the board with many links to the pageant world. So for example, like RuPaul's Drag Race takes many elements of beauty pageants and incorporates them. The winner gets a crown and a scepter, the competitions, there's a lot of talk. There's a lot of people that come from the gay pageant world and drag pageants. And then we also have shows like The Bachelor, which I consider to be the new form of Miss America, right? It's not that people don't want to watch shows that are rooted in pageant culture and beauty culture, because millions of people still, although it's gotten much more complicated in more recent months, but people still tune in millions every week to watch The Bachelor. And, it's like they have a pageant within it, especially at the early stages in every episode. Of course, the rose ceremony, evening gown. The contestants almost always appear in a hot tub or some competition in their bathing suits at some point in those episodes. And there's often some kind of talent competition sort of broadly defined. And Chris Harrison, the host of the show, maybe not going forward, not at the moment, but he hosted Miss America for many years, and especially when Miss America was on ABC. And fun fact, because I'm always full of fun pageant facts, honestly, but Miss America 2013, one of her judges was Mike Fleiss, who created The Bachelor, and they actually got married. They met because he was her judge, and they got married. And if you recall, actually, it might have 2 summers ago, pre-pandemic, there was a big news story because they were getting divorced and was there abuse, and there were these videos that came out. And anyway, she was Miss America 2013 and had a very interesting platform because her father had been in jail and convicted of a white collar crime, and her platform as Miss America was bringing voice to children who were dealing with parents who were incarcerated. Which kind of brings up this last part of the book, which I call the pageantry of politics, but the growing relationship and links between pageantry and politics, partly because of the development of this platform, what used to be called platform, but the platform issue that Miss America contestants in particular had to develop. Now, of course, I can't talk about pageants and politics without talking about Donald Trump as well. So Trump in the 1990s purchased the Miss USA and Miss Universe pageant. Miss USA was born out of the Miss America pageant in the 1950s, because in the 1950s, a bunch of the Miss Americas and the woman who ran Miss America at the time, her name was sort of almost improbably Lenora Slaughter. They were very concerned about respectability. So they were trying to move away from the beauty pageant side of things and focus on talent and tuition in terms of scholarships that Lenora Slaughter had introduced to the competition starting in the late 1930s when she came. And so the winners said, I don't want to be crowned in a bathing suit anymore. I don't want to do appearances in a bathing suit. I'm here for other things. And so Catalina, a company still makes bathing suits, but they were a sponsor at the time. They were like, yeah, we're not cool with that. So we're going to go start our own pageant that focuses on bathing suits. And that was how Miss USA came to be. And they added this Miss Universe component as well. And so Donald Trump was familiar with pageants in the 1980s when he owned lots of casinos in Atlantic City. He, in fact, judged the Miss America pageant the very first year they had the platform competition introduced as part of it. And he discovered that Miss America is a nonprofit and it wasn't really a way to make money. And he was like, yeah, this is not really for me. And a few years later, he bought the Miss USA and Miss Universe franchise. And in many ways, without getting political, because he's very honest about this, and many contestants who supported him in his candidacy and the Make America Great Again platform, said he fulfilled all of these sort of worst stereotypes you have about men in beauty pageants. So he would go backstage. He said it was his prerogative to inspect the competition and inspect the bodies of those who were competing, to evaluate the merchandise. This was also true when he ran Miss Teen USA. So all of those girls were underage. And this particular photo is Olivia Culpo, who's from my state now of Rhode Island. And she became Miss Universe. So this is him in a press conference with her after. And the year she gave up her title as Miss Universe was the year the Miss Universe pageant was held in Russia, and the scene of many of the alleged things that happened in terms of getting Russian interference in the election. So as I like to say, I can tie anything to a beauty pageant, and we just don't realize how interconnected pageants are in so many aspects of our lives. There's another important link to all of this, which is Gretchen Carlson, who was Miss America in 1989. She was actually the reigning Miss America the year Trump judged the Miss America pageant. And of course, she went on to become, again, have a very prominent career as a journalist, and she was one of the hosts of Fox and Friends. And in the summer of 2016, before sort of the much more organized Twitter movement around #MeToo started, she sued Roger Ailes, then the chair of Fox News, for sexual harassment. And so she's sort of been lauded for her role getting out there, still fighting to get rid of NDAs in terms of sexual harassment for women. And in the filing, that when she sued him, one of the major descriptors of her was that she was Miss America 1989, as sort of a way to give her legitimacy and establish her both as a respectable person and someone who, you could say is presumed to be attractive and would be the subject potentially of sexual harassment. Of course, we also have had many politicians themselves now, and many, many more, like Sarah Palin, who was second runner-up at the Miss Alaska pageant. She sort of became the first national female political figure to be tied to pageants, but there are many, many others. Since Trump was elected in 2016, the number of Miss Americas who have run for office has doubled. So from 1921 to 2015, there were a handful of women, and that number has doubled since 2016 in terms of pursuing elected office. But many state winners have gone on to be elected. And there are lots of similarities in that role, again, in terms of having the platform, but also in terms of pageant winners and politicians tend to go to the same parades and civic events and the same chicken dinners. And so there's a tie to sort of being civically engaged. So that takes us up to the present. This is my contact information, just so you have it. And that's me with my boys and my third child, as I like to say, this particular book. And these are the boys who will be at Eisner this summer. So if any of your kids or grandkids are going, they're going session 2 and they're very excited. But anyway, I'm going to stop screen sharing there and open it up to questions and see what you have. And then I'm also happy to share those discussion questions as well.
Okay, so questions. I'm going to go to Marcia and Mark first for the first question. And then if you have a question, you can raise your hand either in the, by hitting the reactions or by asking something in the chat box, and I can call on you.
Hi. My question, I guess, is about the Miss America pageant, which has really come into a relative decline relative to everything else, and has been on a real downward arc. And I'm really wondering what you think the reasons are for that and what the future, if any, is for it.
Well, I often say, we've just celebrated 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. We're going to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Miss America. In next year, we're also going to be celebrating the 50th anniversary of Title IX, right? And so successes like that were part of second wave feminism have, really led to the decline of pageantry in many ways. In the 1950s, 1960s, there weren't as many opportunities open to women. I mean, in fact, in the 1940s, when Miss America started the scholarship component, single digit numbers of women who were college age eligible were going to college. So at that time, right, that was, again, pretty out there that they were offering college scholarships. And for many women, this was a way to get out of a small town, a way to a different career path. But as more and more both educational and professional doors were open to women, sort of eliminated the need for something like the Miss America pageant in particular to be the only pathway to power for women. So that's part of it. I also think a really big part of it is this rise of reality television, right? Like the media landscape has totally transformed, and these pageants have not at all transformed in the same way. So think about a show like American Idol, right? In fact, Carrie Underwood, one of the most successful American Idol winners and biggest pop stars period in the world, and country singers, she actually competed at Miss Oklahoma, which is a famously competitive state, was like second or third runner up. But she wants to be a singer. Why would she go compete at the Miss America pageant, right? You're going to go to American Idol, and in the American Idol story, it's not just a 2-hour special, right? Or a 3-hour special once a year. You get to kind of know the contestants. Of course, that's packaged and all of those things, but you follow them along on their journey. You get attached to certain people for different reasons, whether that's where they're from or some other aspect of their background. And so the sort of rise of those kinds of specials, I think, just makes it like, why should you tune in? And that also raises the question of the sort of job, and it is literally a job of being Miss America or Miss USA or Miss Universe. The pageant really that you see on TV has nothing to do with that. And so many people say, and I've been able to judge some pageants to get this from the other side, that you win the pageant in the interview room. But if you watch the TV show, you have no idea what that interview was like. And you have no sense really of the background and more of the depth. And so I think the combination, both of women having many more opportunities and the change in the media landscape has made it extremely, extremely difficult for these pageants to stay relevant. So Miss America is going to celebrate its 100th anniversary. Not many pop culture things in America are that old, right? This is older than the Super Bowl, the Academy Awards, all kinds of things. But, if you're going to ask me, do I think it will be around 100 years from now? Like, my answer to that is no. 10 years from now, do I worry that it won't be around? Like, honestly, I do. I think that it will always exist in some form because there's a small group of like very dedicated fandom and volunteers. Do I think it potentially will just be in a hotel ballroom and not anywhere on your TV screens? Like, absolutely. I think that's very much a possibility. So, but again, beauty pageant culture to me is deeply embedded, again, in shows like The Bachelor or RuPaul's Drag Race or all kinds of other things. So I'll stop there. That was a long answer to your question, but I hope I answered it.
Do you think that the beauty pageant can be reimagined so that, you know, for reality TV essentially, so that it would potentially, you know, retain its fan, you know, or gain a larger fan base?
I think there's certainly a way in which we have so many streaming platforms these days, right? Like, there's certainly a way in which you could imagine seeing people from their state pageants and the interview process and all of that on Netflix or Amazon Prime, or there's just so many ways in which you could imagine them doing that. I just don't know that that's the direction they want to go in. It will never, ever, ever return to the days in which it was must-see TV, right? But there are so few events. I mean, the Super Bowl, yes. Some people said the Prince Harry and Meghan Markle interview sort of gave rise to that again, but that was the first time in like decades we'd had some sort of like must-see cultural event bring people together. And the Olympics sort of do that, but even the Olympics, right, have declining viewership and those sorts of things. So there's the viewership part and there's the number of participants part. And I think for certain people, right, like this is the right platform for them to develop themselves and use the talents or skills they have or want to further develop. But the number of people who would choose this path has declined, again, because there are so many other opportunities for women to get some of those skills in similar ways, like from other activities, like sports.
Joanna, I see you have a question. Do you want to ask it yourself? Just unmute yourself, Joanna.
Hi, sorry. Okay. I enjoyed your talk very much. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the role of race in the contest, especially of the judges, because if you have mostly white, super rich judges, you're going to have them think what is beautiful is not what a Black rock singer would think is beautiful. We haven't had many Black or Asian Miss Americas or even Native Americans. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the race issue. Thank you.
Yes, it's very, I could say it's complicated, and in other ways it's not complicated, right? Like, the Miss America pageant was totally white until September 1970, when there was a Miss Iowa, Cheryl Brown, the first Black woman to compete. In the 1940s, some of the Miss Hawaiis were Asian, so we wouldn't say she's the first woman of color. In the 1920s, actually, one of the very first Miss Americas identified as Native American, but was very white presenting, and so there's some disagreement over that. We have never had a Latina Miss America, which is very interesting to me just because of the popularity of pageants in Central and South America in particular. I can say for sure, because I've done the whole analysis, in the 21st century, all of these pageants have become much, much more diverse. And if you remember a year or two ago, it was in the press a lot because all 5 of the top pageant winners for that year were Black women. And some of them competed with natural hair. So that was like a big thing, right? Okay, well, here's Vanessa Williams. And a lot of the discourse in the Black community as well was like, well, she's light skinned and, she wore her hair in a particular way. And so like, what does that mean? But in recent times, women have competed and won with natural hair, with braids, with various skin tones. And so there's been a lot of movement in the 21st century, but that took a long time. So as a consequence, there were a lot of what I call niche pageants that developed. So actually the very same night that the women did not actually burn their bras, but were called the bra burners, down the boardwalk around midnight that night was the first Miss Black America pageant. And that was started by the NAACP, considered a positive protest pageant as a way to celebrate Black is beautiful and to work toward integration. of Miss America and other pageants. Miss Black America still exists, again, with a focus on celebrating Black is beautiful. And there are many pageants for Asian women. There's Miss Chinatown USA. I mean, there are many, various cherry blossom festivals that will actually say you have to prove your blood quantum level in order to compete, and various Native pageants that do that as well. But a pageant like Miss Navajo, where the contestants actually have to speak in the indigenous language, show that they have proficiency. It's a way to preserve culture. There's a documentary and you can see it. They actually have to kill a lamb and skin it and cook it. And that's a part of the actual pageant competition. So definitely not Miss America in terms of what you would think, and not all glitz and glamour. But because different types of women and different types of beauty had been excluded for decades and decades and decades, there are these parallel pageants that came up, and that now still exist, again, as a way to preserve culture. So yeah, what does it mean? Again, too, like Bess Meyerson, the only Jewish Miss America. There have not been a lot of Jewish women, period, who've competed at Miss America. And certainly when Bess Meyerson was Miss America, she was, faced a lot of anti-Semitism, particularly in the American South. And it's part of the reason she became a national spokesperson for the ADL. So that, again, she was not allowed in country clubs, even in the Northeast in some places, as we all know the history there for the Jewish community. So it's all very complicated. And when you think about something like the Miss America pageant, which claims to be representative, and if you remember the song that Burt Parks used to sing, that this is the ideal, like who gets left out? So while there have been great strides made, particularly when we think about race and ethnicity and religion, though there's still work to do, there are many areas in which pageants are not diverse enough. So we can think about body type, right? Like even when people wear their hair differently and have different skin color, there is still a particular type of body that wins these pageants. So that's an area that still needs addressing. I mean, Miss America has gotten rid of the swimsuit competition, but since then, still the winners tend to look a particular way. We'll see what happens there. And then issues around sexuality as well. So there's only been one Miss America winner. She is married to a woman, but she was not out when she competed. There's only been one contestant who has been out as a lesbian on the Miss America stage. And for Miss USA, one contestant very recently, the last time they had the pageant, actually openly bisexual. And so I think issues around sexuality are also, there's not enough inclusiveness and would make people feel excluded in various ways. So I hope that answered your question.
Judy, would you ask your question?
Sure. I would say it might seem a little off topic, but I think maybe it's not. About Naomi Osaka. If you'd care to comment about, it's not enough to be the best tennis player in the world. You also have to answer a barrage of stupid questions gracefully.
Yeah, well, I say, and I write this in the preface, like, I actually, as someone who thinks deeply about issues of women, both as a sociologist and as a very public feminist, I can actually think of very few things that so manage to capture the complicated state of American womanhood than the Miss America pageant. So, and this gets to that, right? It's like, you need to be talented, but you need to compete with a smile. And, you need to be earning advanced degrees and like be exceptionally high achieving, but you need to do it in 6-inch heels. And you need to be able to answer all these questions about world events, but do it gracefully. And so we have all these expectations for women today that I think, again, not in a positive way necessarily, but Miss America is reflecting that we do not agree about. We have certain expectations for women that are very complicated. We don't have to agree what American womanhood should look like. I'm not trying to say that, but there are a lot of complexities and contradictions that I think are captured. So I think you're partially seeing that going on. I mean, just the fact too, that like, think about Serena Williams and how her outfits are always critiqued and her body. And here it is. It's like, it's not just what the body should look like, look what the body can do, right? Like we've never had a time where women's like physical achievements and prowess are able to be so celebrated. Think about Simone Biles, the gymnast who just recently did this vault that no woman has ever done before. And, you know, it's partly because she likes it, right? Like she bedazzles her leotard and all of those things, and there's rhinestones everywhere. But yeah, like they're still expected to wear a leotard, and they can get marked off if the leotard shows too much or does things in certain ways. And so there's this policing of women's bodies and personality, and all those women I mentioned also happen to be Black women. So I think that adds another very problematic layer to all of this. But I mean, I think what Naomi Osaka is doing is amazing in terms of, you know, talking about mental health openly. And I think, you know, we really see a sea change there for the younger generation in how we think about so many of these issues. And I loved the Venus Williams interview too, where she was like, they were like, how do you deal with this? She was like, I just know I'm better than all of you. So I thought that was pretty amazing. Yes.
Marcia.
I have read your book. Thank you. It was excellent. And I was glad you mentioned, I had seen a picture a while ago of a competition of women ironing. And you mentioned it in your book that it was part of the 1950s Mrs. America pageant. So is that pageant completely dead in the water now, finally? But that picture of a bunch of women ironing to like prove their value or expert, unbelievable.
Yes, and I actually saw that picture too. It was miscaptioned. It said it was Miss America, and someone sent it to me. I was like, this is not Miss America. This was Mrs. America. But there is still a Mrs. America pageant, and in much the same way that you kind of think about child beauty pageants, the Mrs. America scene has grown in some ways, partly because of reality TV. Bravo did a series called Queen of Crowns, I think it was. Anyway, randomly was actually focused in Rhode Island and Connecticut a few years ago. But these Mrs. pageants are a way for especially women who had competed and maybe didn't feel fulfilled in their Miss pageant careers, that they're able to continue. So there's no test of domesticity. You might have seen too earlier this year, though. It was in, Sri Lanka, that the Mrs. Sri Lanka, who happened to be the Mrs. World, was very upset, and that her person didn't win. And the woman who won, she went and ripped the crown off the woman's head. You can look it up. It's quite extraordinary. And she said she doesn't deserve to be Mrs. Sri Lanka because she's separated from her husband, and that this was not acceptable. And so, I mean, I guess if you are focused on, you know, you have to be married in order to do this, right? And I guess you have to be married then. It's not just, have you been married in the past? But what does that mean, right? It does still fulfill this somewhat archaic notion that like women are only worth something in relation to men, and that women went to college to get their MRS degree. And when I was researching, you might recall, Marcia, that I got excited because I found this original letter in the Smithsonian archives that Lenora Slaughter used to try to convince the Miss America board, who are of course all men, that they should start the scholarship competition. And I had never seen it anywhere before. So she has all these reasons why this is good for women. And at the very end, she was like, and of course, this will make them more attractive to find husbands. And I would love to know, I mean, she has passed away. I would love to know if that's what she really thought, because she was not married at the time. She didn't even get married till she was 37, and she never had kids. And I wonder to what extent that she felt like she had to say that, and she didn't really believe it. And she was just playing the inside game in order to help women get access to this opportunity, because she had done 1 year of college herself and then had to leave because she had to work and support her family. And so it became a mission for her in her life to help get women to finish college degrees. So I don't know. Again, I wish that I could go back in time and ask her if she really meant that, or if, you know, that was the inside game. And in many ways, you know, I say like beauty pageants are clearly not about blowing up the patriarchy. Even the niche pageants, even the ones that are, you know, ultra in some ways, they're about figuring out how the system works and working the system to get ahead. It's not about exploding the system. And again, that's neither good nor bad. I think we need all of those things in order to move forward, but this is a very specific strategy to do it. And I think it's captured in that sense, and the notion that, you know, women, you still need to iron and cook and all of those things.
Joanna had another question, which I think I'll just read, if that's okay, Joanna. The question was, how are the judges selected? How are judges selected? That's so important in selecting beauty. And she put beauty in quotes.
Yes, this is also a very good question, and got back to part of one of the earlier questions about the judges and who judges. So I collected all these historical program books for all of these pageants, and I had researchers, research assistants, undergrads help me code them up. And so I included the judges in this. So sort of interesting to me that even starting in the 1970s, a slight majority of judges are women. So again, we often think the contestants are being judged by men and how they look, but there's always been a slight majority of women. In more recent times, Miss Universe just happened recently, Miss USA happened in November, but ever since the Donald Trump, when he came down the gold escalator, if you'll recall, in 2015, and he gave this press conference, and he said he was talking about Mexicans, and he made very disparaging remarks about people from Mexico. And the Miss Universe pageant was supposed to happen soon, and there was a big, people were like, I'm not going to compete. The judges pulled out, the host pulled out, the network pulled out, everybody pulled out. And one of the things they did when they tried to keep it going was they had an all-female panel of judges. And this is something they've continued. So when Miss Universe just happened last month, it was all women who judged. So there's been a big shift toward that in the Miss pageants. And I can say for sure in the child beauty pageant world, it's a very, 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 very female-dominated space. Now, in terms of race, again, much like you expect, the judging panel has become more diverse over time. And in fact, diversified a little bit earlier than we saw in the winners of the pageants, not necessarily in contestants. But there's been a big change, particularly starting in the 90s and then into the 21st century in terms of the racial and ethnic background of the judges. But what's interesting, really interesting to me, is this rise of women judging. So they often have a former pageant winner on these panels. If you watch on TV, you'll notice that there's always one or two. There's often always someone who's involved in the beauty industry. Maybe they own a hair care company or skincare or makeup, something like that, or fashion. And then there'll be some celebrity like, what's the Kardashians' mom name? Kris Jenner. Like she judged one year. So, someone who's very of the moment. If it's an Olympic year, there'll often be an Olympian who comes and judges. So someone who's sort of prominent. Those people who are on TV are not always the people that do like the interviews and all of that. So often they'll pick like more insidery people to do that and then try to get bigger names for the telecast. But there, and even at the state level, there'll be a mix, like someone who runs a pageant in another state or who has some pageant insider, someone who's held that title before, and then community leaders will come in as well. So someone who's prominent in their community. So it's really a mix. And they, people often say, I remember a few years ago, like Rush Limbaugh judged, but he was like, I thought these things were crazy. And then I, went through this interview process and saw, had these conversations and I understood it was more complicated. So often when people judge, they change their perception in some way. So that's interesting to see as well.
Can you just because finish the sentence? You had said when you were going through something about like John Benet Ramsey, and you could talk a little bit more, and just like the children's pageants and that phenomena with, this country was so obsessed. Obviously the murder of a child is awful, but children are murdered all the time. And we were, you know, the focus of the country was on that little girl's, you know, I forget if she was ever, I don't know, did she just disappear? Was she murdered in her body? I don't remember the story completely, but anyway, if you could address that.
Yeah. So the JonBenet Ramsey story actually became a national news story before they figured out the pageant connection, because she went missing the day after Christmas, wealthy family in Colorado, attractive, et cetera, et cetera. So slow news cycle, the O.J. Simpson stuff was over, and people were kind of looking for that next big story. So gets picked up out of Colorado, goes national. A few days later, they figure out, and her body was found in the house later that day. So they've never solved the murder, but they found her. Then it comes out her mom had been Miss West Virginia and competed at Miss America. Another fun fact, JonBenet Ramsey's mom and her aunt were the first sisters to compete and represent the same state at the Miss America pageant. Anyway, so then because it was a national story already, at these child beauty pageants where she had competed, the directors and photographers sold those photos to the news outlets. And so that's how that really exploded. And the family had no rights to those pictures. This led to a variety of changes actually in a lot of these kids' activities in terms of who owns the copyright and who can sell them, but the family had no control. And so once that came out, I mean, yes, it just went into 1997. I mean, look, you can still, I haven't been into a supermarket in a while, especially with the pandemic, I use Instacart, but you can still, if there's those tabloids, there'll still once in a while be a picture of JonBenet Ramsey, right? And when it was the 20th anniversary of her death, all these shows came back and who killed her and all that. So there is still very, very much this fascination. The pictures, I mean, she dressed up like a Vegas showgirl, right? And wore little heels and had the feathers. There is one picture, I think, of that in the book. It was hard to get access and buy permission to use those pictures because they're very protected in various ways. But she looked like a little Barbie. She had the blonde hair. I mean, you also could say, like, at the funeral, the song from Gypsy, which is like the, you know, quintessential stage mother story and show and movie, Together Wherever We Go, was played, and she was buried with one of her crowns. So, you know, there were various things that added to the mystique around the pageants and the stage mother aspect. You know, I often think what would have happened if JonBenet Ramsey had been a competitive cheerleader or a competitive dancer, like what you see in Dance Moms, and would those communities have been vilified in the same way? And I think to some extent that's true, right? We've had cases where, you know, there was a clip of some young girls dancing to all the single ladies, and they looked like they were wearing outfits that resembled like what prostitutes would wear, right? And so those went fine, but it was like, oh, but they're talented, right? So there's this difference in the child beauty pageant world too, because it's like, was it just how you look, or are you developing a talent? And that is an interesting line too in the Miss pageant world as well. And even if it's just how you look, that you can work to look that beautiful, but is that what we should be teaching young kids? So the JonBenet Ramsey murder destroyed the child beauty pageant world in the state of Colorado, but in other ways expanded the awareness of people. Like suddenly they could see it and be like, oh, like I didn't know about that. Like that looks like fun, or like I could be good at that. People didn't know. And so eventually it led to sort of an expansion more across the nation. And again, TLC, the Toddlers and Tiaras, did much of the same, right? You didn't know about it before, and now suddenly you're seeing it and you can figure out how to seek it out. I mean, JonBenet was pre-internet really, so that's part of it as well. And then as the internet really starts to explode around the turn of the century, there's a lot of online communities that develop around subcultures, including child beauty pageants that still exist today, but that became a way for these disconnected communities to come together. So at that time, the Miss pageants were not as popular. I often say there's an inverse relationship between the popularity of the Miss pageants and child beauty pageants. So Now everything's just, again, because the pandemic, everything is different. But the pageants, kid pageants early in the century were much more in the public eye than the Miss pageants.
So I want to be sensitive to time, and I wanted to ask two questions that are similar. One is, could you talk about your first book, just a little bit about your first book, Playing to Win? And then second, could you talk about any projects you may have coming up?
Okay. So yes, so actually Playing to Win which came out in 2013, was actually born out of a lot of my research on the child beauty pageant. So when I went to college, I discovered sociology, had to do a semester-long project where you could practice doing qualitative and quantitative research in different ways. Didn't realize it at the time, took a few years of therapy, but I realized when I did that project on why mothers of daughters who are very young do child beauty pageants, it was my way to probably stay connected to my mother, who was many states away, and as I went off to a different part of my life. But anyway, doing that project changed the whole trajectory for me, because the professor said, oh, you're really good at this, and I really like doing research. And so that set me on a path to doing the PhD, and that became my senior honors thesis. And I thought I was finding out something about American childhood, the ways in which competition has become more organized at younger and younger ages, and how that links up to the higher education system. But no one could get past the quote unquote crazy pageant moms. So when I went to graduate school, I knew I wanted to examine the space between the family and school in these after school hours. And so, but I studied these much more modal activities of chess and soccer and dance, and the ways in which kids can develop what I call competitive kid capital by competing, and how that links to changes, particularly in higher education in the US over the 20th century. So this book became a return to all of that I had done. And one fun thing I did get to do in chapter 5 is I tracked down a lot of those moms and some of the girls who are now much older and interviewed them, and was able to find out what they thought about how it impacted their lives. So that's what Playing to Win is about. And I interviewed kids for that too, all elementary school age kids. So that was a really great part of that project. And now I'm living it with my own kids, which gives me a totally different perspective. And then what's next for me is I'm actually exploring a run for office. So that is bringing the pageants and the politics and the feminist organizing all together. And that was sort of a pandemic. Just again, you have a book come out in the pandemic, and you think about how can I impact people. And so that is sort of where I've landed. And so I joke, that's my third book at the moment. I'm sure I have a third book in me, just not right now. So yes.
Well, that's pretty exciting. That's a different kind of turn, but a great one. And I know I was looking at your Twitter feed before our program, and I just noticed that you had actually posted something about Run Now, like I guess for women to be running for office. And so I think all of us would be really excited to see how that goes for you. And in the meantime, I want to just remind people that Professor Levey Friedman's book is called Here She Is. We would love for our friends in Port Washington, if you want to read it, to get it through the Dolphin. You can order it through them. But if it's easier for you, especially during these pandemic days, to get it through Amazon.com, you can do that as well. I want to thank you so much for your time, Professor. This was fascinating, and I think we would have been really happy to hear you talk for at least another hour, but I guess instead we'll have to read your book to fill in any of the gaps. But it was an amazing presentation, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Always good to connect, even virtually.